Hello, everybody, and good afternoon. And they've just, I understand, at the end of the officers' course, just right now, these journalists have been given the text of that speech, and this is what he says. At this point, the chief of staff says it's not enough to just extol the various the diversity, but to add to it service people from all over society. This is what needs to be done. This is what the chief of staff is saying about the enlistment of the ultra-Orthodox, which where we're going to reach important decisions and perhaps all kinds of dramatic political processes. And another part of his speech is about the investigations of the 7th of October, where the chief of staff says that we'll have to ask ourselves how we basically we undermined the contract between us and the public when the IDF did not protect the citizens of the State of Israel. We'll try to touch upon these points here, which deal with the tension between the military and the citizens that was produced here over the past 5 months, as well as the question of whether public trust in the IDF has been undermined or has been harmed. And I would like to ask you, Dr. Shafran Gittleman, because there were all kinds of surveys in the past few months that have told us that there is trust, that the public does trust in the IDF, because there is no other army, perhaps because the public set aside what happened on the 7th of October, but ever since we're looking at how the IDF has been fighting, and it has been fighting. Is that true? Is the public trust for the IDF relatively, has it remained relatively full trust? First, I want to say that I have full trust in the IDF and I believe in the IDF. And it's true that all of the surveys since the beginning of the war, and traditionally speaking, the public has been expressing high trust in the IDF, particularly compared to other state institutions. But we interpret this question of trust as liking the IDF or supporting the IDF. What does that mean? The IDF is my son, is my brother, and after having said all that, and after sending all of the equipment that my son could have, if he could have given himself those supplies, if that are the girls up north afraid that they'll be abandoned, and then the commander of the Northern Command says to them, "You are safe here." Does that mean that they believe that commander? We need to say that in this sense of trust, we're still not in that place where the public feels that what was in the 7th of October happened then, and we believe what the IDF says. We have to be very careful when you read the survey data and to understand and to cover different types of trust. When the trust of the public, when the public says, "I will support them," I think that here, just like it's really behaving the way that it indicated in the surveys, that it has a high level of trust, but in issues that are particularly concerning for us, for instance, bringing people back to their homes, or asking blindly and believing what the commanders say, here there's an asterisk. So with those academic issues, several weeks ago, I interviewed one of the mayors in the Galilee, and he also talked about the connection with the commanders in the Northern Command and how much trust there is, or how much trust these residents have in the IDF. But then I asked him if the commander of the Northern Command or the chief of staff were to come to you and say to you, "Sir, you can bring the residents back. I, the commander of the Northern Command, promise you that everything will be okay." And he didn't have an answer. He said that at that point, that's really our test. That's when we'll discover whether the IDF or whether the public still believes the IDF after what happened on the 7th of October. I want to ask you in this sense, in this context, member of Knesset Tur-paz, because you spent 2 months in the Gaza division in the reserves. You saw the war from the inside. You saw it as both a member of Knesset and a citizen. What needs to happen so that the contract that was violated will be rehabilitated, for that trust that was broken on October 7th could go back to being as close as possible to what it was before? I came to the Gaza division on the 8th of October after I I went back to my seat as the chief of operations of the Gaza division, and I saw a division that failed in its mission on the 7th of October, and I believe that, to answer your question, it will take a long time to fix what's broken. But where did this begin? It began on the 8th of October when that division, which failed in its mission, when our towns were conquered and 3,000 terrorists penetrated into the country, it continued to function at the beginning. The reservists like me came. Some of them came that Saturday too. And they sat in their chairs, took their positions, and started fighting. It took several days. In certain places it took longer. But it's the same division that today too is fighting in the Gaza Strip. Therefore, I feel that the Israeli public is torn between two types of the IDF that it knows. The IDF of the 7th of October, which for the first time since the establishment of the state, it allowed towns to be taken and allowed that the worst disaster since that's still bleeding, that's still bloody since the establishment of the state, versus the other IDF, where 3% of the citizens, I'm sure, are reservists. These are people that enlisted. So when they see the IDF, they see themselves. It's a very tough dissonance there. I looked to the left and to the right in the first few days of the war, and I saw that most of the people there were young people, 22, 23 years old, who had only recently been discharged. They all showed up. Two of them were sitting next to me. She took a plane from Nepal to Thailand. She paid $700 to sit next to the toilet of the plane. I fought for her to get a refund for that. She came on Tuesday to the division and sit on her chair. This is the IDF of this country. So I think that when the citizens of this country ask themselves, who are our arms of security? Those who failed on the 7th of October, or those who got up again on the 8th of October? As somebody who has been spending 28 years in the reserves, we don't have a good answer. We're living between those two worlds that we saw in the past 5 months. We see and hear this, every decision that's being made in the IDF, that the IDF has decided to launch investigations, and the public, and this is what is expressed in the social networks, who is going to investigate the IDF? The IDF of the 7th of October? Are they worthy of investigating themselves? The Chief of Staff is going to appoint brigade commanders. Who is going to appoint them? The Chief of Staff that failed on the 7th of October? The Intel and Shabak assume that if there's going to be a limitation in Ramadan, there will be an escalation. Who are they to give us these estimations? We saw what happened at the beginning, and we're seeing this pattern repeat over since the 7th of October. So it's not just that same military that we talk about the big failure. It's big failure, but now the IDF is fighting hard and we're trusting it. Now, too, we see that the security establishment, including the Shabak and the IDF, are dealing with this every single day. And the question is, does the IDF have anything to do right now, or are its hands still tied behind its back in terms of public trust, and perhaps this entire system needs to be replaced? I have to tell you that I don't really understand that argument. I mean, the Chief of Staff could manage the war. He could make very tough decisions, and the entire security establishment could make those decisions on the war in the north. He could decide what is going to be done within Gaza, but to appoint people to their jobs, that he can't do. So after the 7th of October, those who say that the Chief of Staff has to go home, that's one argument. But if you're not making that argument, I can't really understand why in that decision-making, that may be political, or there may be considerations that are not just security ones. That's the point where you say, no, you failed, you can't do that. Is that the threshold? So for those who raise those arguments, I don't think that this is really the argument of the concept of not relying on that person's abilities, because if that was the case, then I don't think you would trust that person with managing the most complex war. The question is the IDF a lame duck right now? Let me put it this way. As somebody who heard, along with Eisenkot, the Reserve Lieutenant General, who heard the Prime Minister come to the Defense and Foreign Affairs Committee, I'll just quote very briefly. The words, Hamas was deterred that was said there, and I jotted that down. That came from that meeting. So the idea of it's not just the idea of there are other security organizations. There was a political echelon. There were decisions with 12. When Avi Rosenfeld was the division commander, there was an entire thing going, a major event happening in the country. And I'll say one more thing: we don't have another military. We have no other choice. And one of the reasons that Israeli trust, speaking of going back to your original question, is the way it is because ultimately the Israelis look at the politicians, and when they look at the politicians, they're not sure that they're seeing themselves. But when they see the IDF in uniform, they say, "Oh, I was one of those guys too," or "My son is like that right now. My daughter's there." Therefore, the level of identification is higher. And now, related to what you just asked, I don't think we have a choice. We don't have a choice. In other words, and I'll word it using the Jewish language that I was raised up. This is not over. This is the problem, that we're not seeing the end here. And I think that what's missing isn't just policy, but also an end game. An end game. What is the end game? And those who have to lead here and determine the general lines and to say to the IDF, this is the military level, and from this point on, it's a political echelon that's decided not to do this. And then all of your questions of who's going to appoint whom, the answer is, okay, we had to say, okay, this is the end of stage B. Now the IDF, you need to reach conclusions and make lessons learned. This isn't happening because there's no policy. That's what's missing right now. Let me clarify the question. Do you feel that the Chief of Staff needs to resign? Yes, and when? Not now, but not far from today. Yes, the answer, I believe, is yes. I think that anybody who was number one in this event in the political and military echelons will need to resign. I think that this will happen. I'm hopeful. I'm not sure. I think that's pretty clear. It's almost obvious that will happen in the military echelon under the current government too. If it's not replaced, look, I think that there is pretty complex dissonance here. In Israel, we got used to the morals of thieves. Unfortunately, we were accustomed to this. People make decisions or promises that they're used to not keeping. People know that those promises won't be kept. You know, I saw just today that the Supreme Court stopped the firing of Yoram Dora. This is a job with very critical security responsibility. This is also part of the people with the professional jobs. So I think that. So under this government as well, look, I would like to hope, and I work in this too because this is part of my job, that this government will finish working, stop working soon. And this government does not have the right to make decisions regarding fighting and the state of Israel. And not just me, you know. It says that in every survey, in every channel, including Channel 14. Therefore, the head of the system, Netanyahu, needs to go home. And after that, all of the rest of the people in the security establishment were responsible. And then the next government will appoint the next head of Shabak and head of army. Okay, so let me go on to you then.
The same question. I want to ask you the same question. Do you think that the current Prime Minister will appoint the next Chief of Staff? I don't want to go into politics, but I think that the public expects the military echelon. They actually took responsibility, but there are roles that the officials have responsibilities. And I think that contrary to other positions, the head of the security establishment, when they said, and they all said that during the very first week in the military and other security forces, they said, we are responsible. And they knew that there were going to be implications. And I think that we're not going to have to tell them to go. I think that they will just do it. So it's a good thing to believe. Well, I do not disagree with you, but I think that today they already asked themselves about the right timing to do that. But I do not believe that the chief of staff and the commanders that said I'm responsible, I think they know pretty well what it means. But I tell you what the problem is. Whoever, so I spoke with senior officers in Gaza, and we were wearing uniforms, and they asked me, "Do you think I should quit because of what happened?" Let me tell you the truth. You look at the more senior official, my commander, my boss, did they take responsibility? Let me tell you, I don't think that senior military officer think that the politicians are at the higher positions. Unfortunately, yes, it doesn't refer to politicians as well. So there is this issue of draft of ultra orthodox. Since you've been investigating this topic for a long time, so I'm curious to know what you think about whether it's all about politics and it's not only about the value, but do we really need them? Because we need more people, and the missions are going to change, and they're going to need bigger forces. So at the end, is it realistic, or it's just empty words? Well, you are trying to make me a political correspondent. Let me tell you one thing. I think that if there are a moment in the life of a nation that everything changes, these are these moments. Is it possible? We used to say that it's not politically feasible, although it's the right thing to do. But we should stop speaking this way. We should understand that there are moments when we are entitled to demand justice. I don't know whether tomorrow morning you'll see ultra-Orthodox students at the induction center, right? How many ultra-Orthodox drafts every year? I really do not know. I cannot assess it. It actually, but I think that on the one hand, actually. Making them share the burden, not only theoretically, and things will not continue as usual. Let me just add another statement. It's impossible for such major parts of Israeli society, for them, everything changed. So it should change for all sectors of society because we want to live here side by side. Otherwise, it's not going to be possible. Yes. So the same question to you: Do you see this as a member of Yesh Atid and also the Reservist Union? You are familiar with civil society and Reservists. Do you think that it's going to change, or maybe these are just empty words? I'm telling you, and I am quite certain about it. First of all, as someone who investigated this topic in Iron Swords, two units of ultra Orthodox actually fought in Iron Swords, and they fought very courageously. So it's not true that ultra Orthodox cannot serve. We should get rid of this belief. Don said, call it a conception. Yeah, a conception. Secondly, I agree with what Idit said, that everything's going to change. And I speak intimately with ultra-Orthodox member of the Knesset. And they tell me, yes, tomorrow morning, if you draft a third of the ultra-Orthodox youngsters, it might happen. So I think in 10 years we'll see thousands of ultra-Orthodox, maybe dozens of thousands of ultra-Orthodox in the IDF. We have no other choice, and I think that the Israeli society will need to prioritize things from anew. So there is the coalition of Zionist parties, and it will all become a consensus, and it will be supported by financial incentives. So sometimes members of Knesset tell me that ultra-Orthodox should draft, but some politicians, ultra-Orthodox politicians, admit that they cannot make it happen. So I heard it from member of the Knesset that understands the reality, but we have no other choice. So we won't be able to exist here without drafting the ultra orthodox. Yeah, but we have no other choice but to actually be on time, and we also have to remain optimistic, and we don't want to delay. So thank you very